You know, I always thought I had a good thing going with Jackie. We'd been married for 5 years, and while no marriage is perfect, ours was solid, or so I thought. But the story I'm about to tell you isn't one you'd expect from a happy husband. In fact, I wish I'd never gone to that farm in Arizona at all. It started off simple. Jackie and I had been working long hours in the city, and we needed a break, a place where we could disconnect from the noise and just breathe for a bit. Jackie suggested the farm. She'd been there a few times with friends and loved it. She'd say things like, "The sunsets are unreal," or "The horses have these deep, soulful eyes." I'll be honest, I wasn't much of a farm guy, but I knew Jackie loved the place, so I figured, why not? Once we arrived, I could see what she meant. The place was beautiful, acres of golden fields stretching out under a sky so wide, it felt like you could fall into it. The farmhouse was old but charming, with a wraparound porch, creaky wooden floors, and a cozy feel. Jackie seemed to light up the minute we got there, more relaxed than I'd seen her in ages. It felt like it would be the perfect place to reconnect. Now, Jackie had this idea to invite a few of our friends up, make it a casual getaway. She reached out to a handful of mutual friends, and they all seemed thrilled. I wasn't going to lie, I thought it'd be nice too. We hadn't seen some of them in months, and this farm seemed like a perfect backdrop for an overdue catch-up. The first one to show up was Brandon, an old friend of Jackie's who'd been in our circle for years. I'd never thought much about it, but there was always a kind of familiarity between Jackie and Brandon that I chalked up to them knowing each other before I came into the picture. Anyway, after we all settled in and picked our rooms, Jackie suggested I take a walk around the property. She knew I loved exploring, and I figured it'd be a good way to familiarize myself with the place. As I wandered, I couldn't get over how quiet everything was. The only sounds were the birds chirping and the occasional soft neigh from the horses in the distance. I wandered through the barn, peered into an old shed, and eventually made my way into a back room in the farmhouse that looked like it hadn't been touched in years. There were dusty shelves, a bunch of old furniture, and, tucked away in a corner, a box of videotapes. I almost didn't see it, but something about the box seemed off. Curious, I wiped off some dust and picked up one of the tapes. It had no label, just a date scribbled on the side, May 4th, 2022. I had this strange urge to find out what was on it. At first, I tried to ignore the tapes. I mean, who finds random tapes in a hidden room and actually watches them? But the thought nagged at me. So, a little later, when Jackie was busy outside with the horses and everyone was spread out around the house, I snuck back to the room and grabbed a few of the tapes, slipping them into my bag. I waited until everyone was out by the fire that night, sipping drinks and laughing, before I snuck back inside. I grabbed my laptop and hooked it up to an old VCR I'd found in the corner of the room. My hands were shaking as I slid the tape in, but I couldn't say why. I told myself it was probably just old footage from past farm trips, maybe some silly videos of Jackie and her friends. But what I saw, it changed everything. The screen flickered, and there was Jackie, standing in a field. My heart warmed seeing her. She looked so happy, her hair loose and wild in the breeze. But then, from off-screen, Brandon walked into the frame. They laughed and talked for a bit, and then, out of nowhere, they kissed. My stomach dropped. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. It wasn't just a friendly kiss either. There was something raw and real in it, a familiarity that went beyond friendship. They laughed, pulled away, but then Jackie reached for him again, and they disappeared into the tall grass, out of view. I sat there, frozen, not sure if I was angry or heartbroken or both. I thought about confronting Jackie right then, but something in me needed more. I grabbed another tape, hoping, praying, it was a one-time thing. But with every tape I watched, it got worse. Different days, different settings, even different people. I saw Jackie with Brandon again, but there were others too, mutual friends, some people I barely recognized. Each one had that same look of intimacy, like I was the last one in the room to find out. By the end, I felt numb. Everything I'd believed about my marriage, about my wife, it felt like a joke. My whole life felt like a joke. When I finally came back outside, Jackie was by the fire, laughing as if nothing had happened. I couldn't believe it. I wanted to storm over there, scream at her in front of everyone. But instead, I just walked up, sat down beside her, and forced a smile. I knew if I confronted her in front of everyone, she'd deny it, turn it into some big dramatic scene where I'd look like the crazy one. So I waited until we were alone in the bedroom that night. She was getting ready for bed, humming to herself like she didn't have a care in the world. I couldn't hold it in any longer. "Jackie," I said, barely recognizing my own voice. She turned, surprised at the tone, and for a split second, I almost chickened out. "What's wrong?" she asked, her brow furrowing. "I know," I said, and those two words seemed to hang in the air like a thunderstorm about to break. She laughed nervously. "No, what?" "Don't play dumb, Jackie. I found the tapes. I know about you and Brandon. And I know about the others too." Her face went pale. For a second, she looked like she might deny it, but then she let out this shaky laugh. "Alex, come on. You really believe that?" She was smiling, trying to brush it off like I was overreacting, like I'd somehow imagined everything. But I wasn't backing down. "I filmed it, Jackie. I recorded the tapes on my phone. I've got proof." The smile dropped from her face, and in that moment, I saw a flicker of fear. She realized there was no way out of it this time. Jackie's face went from shock to anger in seconds, as if she was calculating her next move. But this time, there was no wriggling out of it. She realized I was dead serious. I watched her go from denial to panic, then finally, a defensive defiance. "What were you doing snooping around in that room anyway?" she snapped, crossing her arms. "That was private, Alex." "Private?" I almost laughed. "You're mad at me for finding out that you cheated on me? That's your angle here?" Jackie's eyes flashed. She was always quick to turn things around, make me feel like I was the one out of line. It was a skill I'd seen her use before, but never against me. "So, what?" I continued, my voice barely a whisper. "How long has this been going on, Jackie? How many people?" She bit her lip, the anger in her eyes fading into something else, shame, maybe? Regret? I wanted so badly to believe that she'd come to her senses, that she'd break down, apologize, give me some explanation that would somehow make it all bearable. But instead, she muttered, "Alex, it's complicated." Complicated? I nearly yelled, feeling a rage build up in me that I hadn't even known I had. I'd always been a calm guy, not the type to lose my temper, but this felt like it was tearing me apart from the inside. "Do you love him?" I asked, even though I hated myself for needing to know. She hesitated, eyes darting around as if searching for the right answer. Finally, she shook her head. "It's not like that. It's... I don't know. It's something different, okay?" "Different," I repeated, letting the words sink in. That was all she could offer? After everything, just different? I grabbed my phone and showed her the screen. "Do you see this? I recorded it, Jackie. I recorded everything." Her eyes widened as she stared at the screen, the realization hitting her like a tidal wave. She knew there was no going back now. "I'm filing for divorce," I said, my voice steady. "And I'm going to make sure you don't get a single cent." Her face crumpled. "Alex, wait, please. Just listen to me." "Listen to what, Jackie? More lies? More excuses?" I could feel myself unraveling, my voice rising. "You betrayed me, with our friends, in our own home, and you want me to listen?" Tears welled up in her eyes, but I didn't care. I couldn't bring myself to feel sympathy for her. She looked vulnerable and scared, but all I could think about was the betrayal, the web of lies she'd spun around me for who knows how long. "Alex, I didn't mean for it to happen like this. She trailed off, and for once, she seemed lost for words. "You didn't mean for it to happen?" I spat. "Did you not mean for it to happen the first time, or the 5th, or the 10th? Silence. She had nothing to say, and I realized there was nothing she could say that would make this better. After what felt like hours of tense silence, I finally turned and walked out of the room. I could hear her footsteps behind me, soft and hesitant. She was probably hoping I'd turn around, give her a chance to explain. But I wasn't giving her that satisfaction. I walked outside, needing air, needing space. The night was quiet, the stars scattered across the sky like nothing was wrong in the world. I could hear the distant sounds of horses in the field, their soft neighs cutting through the silence. It was surreal, standing there, knowing that my whole life had just been turned upside down, while everything else remained so perfectly still. I don't know how long I stood there, just staring out into the darkness. I kept replaying the tapes in my mind, seeing Jackie with Brandon, with others. Each memory felt like a knife to the gut. How could she have done this to me? How could she have betrayed everything we built together? Then I heard footsteps behind me. I turned to see Brandon standing there, his face unreadable. "Alex," he started, his voice low. "Can we talk?" I clenched my fists, feeling a surge of anger so strong, I had to force myself to stay in control. "You want to talk?" I growled. "What could you possibly have to say to me, Brandon?" He held up his hands, his expression desperate. "Look, man, I'm sorry. I didn't mean for any of this to happen." "There it is again!" I snapped. "That's what everyone keeps saying. You didn't mean for it to happen." "Well, guess what? It did." He looked down, swallowing hard. I know. I messed up, okay? I'm not going to deny it. I thought you should know that it wasn't about you. It was just a mistake." "A mistake," I echoed, shaking my head. "You don't accidentally betray someone, Brandon. You don't accidentally hurt the people you're supposed to care about." He looked genuinely remorseful, but at that moment, I couldn't care less. I was done with excuses, done with the endless justifications. I needed to get out of there, away from all of them. I turned and started walking back toward the house, feeling a strange sense of calm settle over me. It was like a weight had been lifted, like I'd finally let go of something that had been dragging me down. Inside, Jackie was waiting, her face blotchy from crying. She reached out as I passed, grabbing my arm. "Alex, please. Don't throw everything away. We can work through this. We can fix it." I looked at her, feeling nothing but emptiness. "No, Jackie. There's nothing left to fix." Without another word, I pulled away and headed upstairs. I needed to pack my things, get out of there, and figure out what to do next. I didn't know where I was going, but anywhere was better than here. I didn't sleep that night. I lay in the dark, staring up at the ceiling, my mind looping endlessly through everything I'd seen. Every time I closed my eyes, I could see it all again, Jackie laughing, Brandon leaning in, the way she looked at him, the way she used to look at me. How long had she been drifting away? How long had I been a fool, missing every single sign? Around dawn, I couldn't take it anymore. I got up, pulled on a jacket, and slipped out of the house. The early morning air was sharp, cold, but I welcomed it. It felt like a slap to the face, a harsh reminder that this nightmare was real. I walked aimlessly, my thoughts pounding in my head, each one angrier and more chaotic than the last. It wasn't just Jackie's betrayal that tore me apart, it was the years we'd spent together, the life we'd built. All those little moments, the laughter, the promises, it all felt like it had been ripped away, leaving this empty shell of a life I didn't recognize. I thought I knew her. I thought we were partners, friends. But now, it was like she was a stranger. As I wandered, I found myself near the field where the horses were grazing, their calm presence contrasting painfully with the storm raging inside me. I sat on a nearby rock, watching them, wondering if they'd been there the whole time, silent witnesses to all the things I'd been blind to. A sick feeling settled in my gut as I imagined Jackie out here, meeting Brandon, hiding their twisted little romance in plain sight. I didn't even realize someone was behind me until I heard a voice. "Alex?" I turned, my stomach twisting as I saw Jackie standing there, wrapped in a sweater, her face drawn and pale. She must have followed me out. For a brief second, I almost wanted her to sit down, to tell me something, anything, that could make this nightmare make sense. But then I remembered the tapes, the endless betrayals. I clenched my fists, feeling a surge of bitterness rise up. Why are you here? I snapped, my voice colder than I'd intended. She winced but didn't move. I wanted to talk. To explain. What is there to explain, Jackie? I asked, glaring at her. I saw everything. Every single lie, every broken promise. She looked away, swallowing hard. I know. I can't take any of it back, but I just need you to understand. Understand? I let out a bitter laugh. You want me to understand why you cheated on me with our friends? Why you dragged me out here to rub it in my face? She flinched, hugging herself tightly. Alex, please. It wasn't about hurting you. I was confused, okay? I don't know when things changed, but somewhere along the way, I lost myself. Lost yourself? I repeated, my voice thick with anger. You didn't lose yourself, Jackie. You chose this. You chose to betray me, again and again. She stood there, silent, looking more fragile than I'd ever seen her. But it didn't matter. Whatever love or pity I'd had for her was gone, drowned in the sea of lies she'd buried me under. After a long pause, she whispered, I know you hate me, but please, Alex. Don't throw everything away. We can still fix this. I stared at her, barely able to believe what I was hearing. You think we can fix this? After everything you've done? She took a step closer, her voice pleading. Please, Alex. I'll go to therapy, I'll do whatever it takes. Just, don't end it like this. I shook my head, feeling a mix of rage and despair. It's already over, Jackie. You ended it the first time you decided I wasn't enough for you. The words hung between us, final and unforgiving. She stared at me, her eyes filling with tears, and for a brief, terrible moment, I felt a pang of guilt. But then I remembered what I'd seen, the tapes that had shattered every good memory we'd ever shared, and I forced myself to turn away. I left her standing there, alone in the field, and walked back to the house. I didn't want to be around her anymore, I didn't even want to be in the same state as her. All I wanted was to disappear, to leave this nightmare behind and forget it had ever happened. Inside, I grabbed my things and packed up, not caring about what I left behind. There was no point in staying, not when every corner of that house, every inch of that farm, was tainted with her betrayal. As I zipped up my bag, I heard footsteps on the stairs. Brandon. Leaving already? He asked, his tone cautious. I didn't even look at him. I have nothing to say to you, Brandon. He sighed, his voice filled with regret. I'm sorry, Alex. I never wanted this to happen. Save it, I muttered, pushing past him. I was done with the apologies, done with the lies. As I reached the door, he grabbed my arm. Look, man, don't let this ruin everything. You'll find someone else, someone who deserves you. I wrenched my arm free, glaring at him. You don't get to give me advice, Brandon. Not after everything you've done. For a second, he looked genuinely hurt, but I didn't care. He was as much a part of this betrayal as Jackie was, and I wanted nothing to do with him. I left without another word, my heart pounding as I stepped outside, feeling the weight of the past few days crashing down on me. I felt like I was in a daze, barely aware of my own steps as I walked down the long dirt road, away from the farmhouse, away from the life I thought I had. I'd driven Jackie's car up here, so I had no way of getting back to the city. But at that point, I didn't care. I just needed to walk, to feel the ground under my feet, to escape the wreckage of my life. I walked for hours, each step heavy, each breath filled with the bitter taste of betrayal. The Arizona sun rose high, baking the earth around me, but I barely felt it. I was numb. Part of me wanted to look back, to see if Jackie was standing on the porch watching me go, maybe even chasing after me. But I knew better. I knew that even if she was watching, it wouldn't be with the remorse or regret I'd been craving. No, it'd be the kind of regret that comes only when someone's secrets are no longer safe. As the farmhouse faded into the distance, my phone buzzed. It was Jackie. Alex, please. Just let me explain. I deleted the message without even reading it fully. A part of me wanted her to suffer, to feel the hurt and confusion I'd been drowning in since I watched those tapes. But mostly, I just wanted her gone from my life, her and every lie she'd ever told me. I must have walked for miles before I finally found a gas station, a tiny, dusty building that looked like it hadn't seen a new coat of paint in decades. I stepped inside, barely registering the concerned look from the cashier as I approached. "You okay there, bud?" he asked, looking me up and down. "Just a long night," I muttered, realizing how ragged I must have looked. I could see my reflection in the grimy window, dark circles under my eyes, hair disheveled, my shirt wrinkled from a night spent tossing and turning on the floor. "Need a ride somewhere?" he offered, raising an eyebrow. I shook my head, but then I paused. I couldn't stay here, but I couldn't go back either. "Actually, yeah. Do you know if there's a bus station nearby?" He nodded, scratching his beard. "Yeah, it's about a mile down the road. I can call a cab if you need." "No, I'll walk," I said, thanking him. I needed the time, the distance. I needed to feel every painful step, to remind myself that this was real. I walked to the bus station in silence, ignoring the dull ache in my feet. By the time I got there, my body was exhausted, but my mind was still racing. I couldn't stop replaying everything that had happened, the tapes, Jackie's face when I confronted her, the way she looked right through me as if none of it mattered. I'd always believed we were partners, equals. But now I realized how naive I'd been. She'd been living a double life, right in front of my eyes, and I'd been too blind to see it. I bought a ticket back to the city and sat in the nearly empty terminal, feeling more alone than I ever had in my life. As I waited for the bus, I pulled out my phone and scrolled through old photos, each one feeling like a punch to the gut. There we were on our wedding day, her in a white dress, me looking at her like she was my whole world. There was the trip we'd taken to the coast last year, the late-night dinners, the spontaneous road trips. Every memory, every smile, it all felt like a lie now, tainted by the truth I'd uncovered. As I sat there, the anger started to give way to something deeper, something colder. I realized that the person I thought I knew, the person I loved, she didn't exist. The Jackie in those photos, the Jackie I'd married, she was just an illusion, a mask. And now, that mask had been ripped away, leaving nothing but a stranger who'd torn my life apart. The bus arrived, and I boarded without a word, sinking into a seat at the back. The ride back to the city was long and silent, giving me too much time alone with my thoughts. I kept replaying the confrontation in my head, wondering if I should have handled it differently. Maybe I should have yelled, screamed, demanded answers. But I knew that even if I had, it wouldn't have changed anything. The truth was out, and there was no going back. When I finally arrived back in the city, it was almost dark. I walked the familiar streets, feeling like a stranger in my own life. I didn't want to go home, to the apartment we'd shared, the place filled with reminders of everything we'd lost. But I didn't know where else to go. So I went back, stepping into the silence, feeling the weight of emptiness settle over me like a shroud. The apartment was exactly as we'd left it, our photos on the wall, her books scattered on the coffee table, her jacket draped over a chair. It felt wrong, surreal, like I was walking through the ruins of someone else's life. I stood in the doorway, staring at it all, feeling a wave of nausea rise up. I couldn't stay here. Not with all these reminders of her, of us. I grabbed a duffel bag and started stuffing clothes into it, my hands shaking. I wasn't sure where I was going, but I knew I couldn't stay here, surrounded by ghosts. I was about to leave when my phone buzzed again. Another message from Jackie. "Alex, please. I need you to talk to me. Don't do this." I threw the phone onto the couch, not even reading the rest. I didn't care what she had to say. She'd had her chance to explain, to come clean. Now, all I wanted was to leave this life behind, to start over somewhere far, far away. As I zipped up my bag, my phone buzzed again. This time, it was a call from Brandon. I almost laughed, the anger flaring up inside me all over again. But instead of ignoring it, I answered. "What do you want?" I said, my voice cold. Alex, he started, his voice hesitant. Look, I know you probably hate me, but I need you to know that I'm sorry. For everything. I clenched my jaw, feeling the anger simmering just beneath the surface. Sorry isn't going to fix this, Brandon. Sorry isn't going to erase what you did. I know, he said, his voice barely a whisper. I know I can't take it back. But, if you ever want to talk, if you ever need anything, I'm here. I laughed, a hollow, bitter sound. You think I'd ever want anything from you? You and Jackie destroyed everything I had, everything I believed in. I don't want your apologies, Brandon. I don't want anything from you. He was silent for a moment, and I could hear his breathing on the other end, slow and steady. All right. I get it, he said finally, his voice thick with regret. I won't bother you again. I hung up without another word, feeling a strange sense of satisfaction as I tossed the phone onto the couch. There was nothing left to say, nothing left to salvage. My life with Jackie, my friendships, everything, it was all gone, shattered beyond repair. I grabbed my bag and left the apartment, stepping out into the cold night. I didn't know where I was going, but I knew that I couldn't stay here, surrounded by memories of a life that no longer existed. I felt hollow, broken, like a part of me had been ripped away and replaced with nothing but pain. As I walked through the empty streets, I realized that I was truly alone. The life I'd built, the people I'd trusted, it was all gone, leaving me with nothing but the shattered remains of a future I'd once believed in. And as I wandered through the darkness, I wondered if I'd ever be able to find my way back to the light. I don't know how long I walked that night, aimless and directionless through the empty streets of the city. Hours, maybe. By the time I stopped, my legs ached, and my mind was raw with exhaustion. I found myself at the edge of a park Jackie and I used to visit on lazy Sunday afternoons. It was one of those places that was always alive, bustling with kids, families, friends, and laughter. But at this hour, it was quiet, the only sound the whisper of the wind through the trees. I sank onto a bench, staring out into the darkness, trying to make sense of the mess my life had become. A part of me kept expecting Jackie to call again, to beg for forgiveness, to try to pull me back into her web of lies. But my phone stayed silent, and that silence echoed in the hollow place inside me. I could have called her back. I could have demanded an explanation, a reason for everything she'd done. But the thought made me feel sick. There was nothing she could say that would make this better, no explanation that would erase the betrayal. Over the next few weeks, I drifted through life in a haze. I didn't go back to the apartment. The thought of returning to that place, filled with memories of Jackie, felt unbearable. Instead, I rented a small, dingy motel room on the edge of town, a temporary refuge while I figured out my next steps. Days blurred together, an endless loop of sleepless nights and silent days. I'd always thought that heartbreak was supposed to be loud, filled with rage and tears, the kind of grief that exploded outward. But for me, it was quiet, numbing, a dull ache that settled in my bones and refused to leave. I knew I had to move on, to find a way to let go of Jackie and the life we'd built together. But the memories were everywhere, lingering like ghosts, haunting me at every turn. I couldn't walk down a street without seeing a place we'd visited together, couldn't look at my phone without stumbling across old photos, messages, fragments of a love that no longer existed. It was like living in a graveyard, surrounded by the remnants of a life that had died without warning. One night, about a month after everything had fallen apart, I finally decided to take some kind of action. I met with a divorce lawyer, a stern woman with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense attitude. She listened to my story with a detached professionalism, jotting down notes as I recounted the betrayal, the tapes, the confrontation at the farm. When I was done, she looked at me with a kind of pity I'd seen 1,000 times in the mirror. "I'll be honest, Alex," she said, setting down her pen. "This isn't going to be easy. You have evidence, but the legal process is complicated, and these things rarely end cleanly." I nodded, the weight of her words settling over me like a shroud. I'd known this wouldn't be easy, that the road ahead was filled with more pain and conflict. But hearing it out loud made it real, made the enormity of the situation sink in. I was about to enter a battle, one that would tear apart whatever was left of my life. Just do whatever you have to do to make sure she doesn't get anything, I said, my voice flat, hollow. The lawyer gave me a long, measured look. I'll do my best. But you should prepare yourself, Alex. Divorce, it has a way of stripping people down, of taking whatever's left and turning it to ashes. I left her office feeling more drained than ever, the future stretching out before me like a bleak, endless road. I knew I'd win this fight, that I'd walk away with the legal victory, maybe even some small measure of justice. But it wouldn't change anything. It wouldn't bring back the life I'd lost, wouldn't erase the scars Jackie had left behind. Days turned into weeks, and the divorce process dragged on, a slow, painful march through court hearings, paperwork, and meetings with lawyers. Every time I saw Jackie in the courtroom, sitting across from me with that same expression of regret, I felt a fresh wave of anger and despair. She tried to talk to me once, in the hallway after a hearing, but I brushed past her without a word, not trusting myself to keep calm. The worst part was the loneliness, the crushing silence that filled every corner of my life. Friends reached out at first, offering words of comfort, invitations to dinner or drinks. But I pushed them all away, too raw, too broken to face the outside world. I told myself I didn't need anyone, that I could handle this on my own. But the truth was, I was lost, adrift in a sea of memories and regrets. One night, after a particularly brutal day in court, I found myself sitting alone in my motel room, a bottle of whiskey my only company. I stared at the walls, at the cracked paint and the flickering light, feeling the weight of my solitude press down on me. I'd lost everything, my wife, my home, the life I'd spent years building. And for what? For the lie of love, for the hollow promise of happiness that had slipped through my fingers like sand. As the whiskey burned its way down my throat, I thought about Jackie, about the love we'd once shared. I thought about the laughter, the late-night conversations, the dreams we'd built together. And I realized, with a sickening clarity, that none of it had been real. I'd loved a mirage, a phantom, a version of Jackie that had never truly existed. I stayed in that motel room for weeks, sinking deeper into the darkness, letting the pain consume me. I went through the motions of life, eating, sleeping, going to work, but I felt like a ghost, a hollow shell of the person I'd once been. Friends stopped calling, the invitations stopped coming, and I was left alone with my grief, my anger, my regret. Eventually, the divorce was finalized, the last thread connecting me to Jackie severed. I walked out of the courthouse with the divorce papers in hand, feeling a strange mixture of relief and emptiness. I'd won, technically. Jackie hadn't gotten a penny, and I was free to start over, to rebuild my life. But as I stood on the steps of the courthouse, staring out at the city, I realized that I didn't feel victorious. I didn't feel free. I felt lost. I spent the next few months drifting from place to place, staying in cheap motels, avoiding the places that reminded me of Jackie. I cut off contact with mutual friends, unable to face the reminders of the life I'd left behind. I became a stranger to myself, a shadow of the man I'd once been, haunted by memories I couldn't escape. One night, months after the divorce, I found myself back in that same park, sitting on the same bench where I'd sat that first night after leaving the farmhouse. The city lights flickered in the distance, casting a soft glow over the empty streets. I sat there, staring out into the darkness, feeling the weight of everything I'd lost settle over me like a heavy, suffocating blanket. I'd thought that time would heal the wounds, that the pain would fade, that I'd find a way to move on. But the scars were still there, deep and raw, a constant reminder of the love I'd given and the betrayal I'd endured. I tried to rebuild, to start over, but I couldn't escape the emptiness that had taken root inside me. As I sat there, alone in the darkness, I realized that some wounds never truly heal, that some betrayals leave a mark that time can't erase. I would go on, I would survive, but I would never be the same. The life I'd once known was gone, and in its place was a hollow, aching void that no amount of time could fill. And as I sat there, staring into the empty night, I finally accepted the truth: sometimes, there are no happy endings. Sometimes, all that's left is the broken pieces of a life that can never be put back together.